What would you do if someone judged your entire worth? By the clothes on your back? Imagine walking into a first-class lounge, ticket in hand, only to be told politely, cruelly, that you don't belong there. No raised voices, just that quiet, poisonous tone that says you're less. That's what happened to David Langston, a black man in a gray hoodie, sitting alone with his book and his dignity. He could have argued. He could have shouted. But instead, he made a choice that changed everything. Because sometimes, the loudest answer isn't a scream. It's power delivered in silence. What would you do if humiliation stared you in the eye? Would you walk away? Or would you own the very system that tried to shame you tonight? We'll revisit one man's calm revenge and the empire of justice he built from quiet pain. It's not just about wealth, it's about worth. And maybe, by the end, you'll ask yourself, what would I have done if I were him? Stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe, because this is more than a story. It's a reminder that respect is the richest currency we'll ever own. What if one careless smirk, tossed across an airport lounge, could cost someone their entire kingdom? That was the question whispering through the halls of Sky Nova Tower 8 hours after midnight. Reporters crowded outside the glass building in Midtown Manhattan, their breath fogging against the morning chill. Inside, Flight Attendant Carla Monroe sat stiffly in a leather chair outside the chairman's office. Her uniform was perfect crease-sharp skirt, navy scarf, polished heels, but her palms were sweating. Through the frosted glass she could see movement. Security officers passed in silence. Executives avoided her eyes. The intercom crackled, soft and final. "Ms. Monroe, Mr. Langston will see you now." Her heart hammered once hard like the thud of landing gear. She rose, smoothed her skirt, and walked in. The man waiting by the window wore no tie, no designer watch, just a charcoal gray suit, open collar, and quiet gravity. The skyline glowed behind him, Manhattan waking beneath a pale winter sun. He didn't turn right away. For a long moment, she saw only his reflection in the glass, a tall black man, calm and still, the sort of stillness that made noise irrelevant. When he finally faced her, she recognized him, and the recognition nearly took her breath away. It was the passenger from seat 1A, the man in the worn bomber jacket she'd mocked less than a day ago, the one she'd called out of place. "Please sit," he said simply. His voice was even, warm, the kind of tone that made silence heavier. She obeyed, hands trembling in her lap. He looked at her for a moment, then glanced toward the skyline again. "Funny thing about altitude," he said quietly. "Up here, people think the air makes them bigger, but altitude doesn't change who we are. It just shows how small some of us can be." Carla swallowed, words catching in her throat. "Sir, Mr. Langston." "I didn't know." He raised a hand. "You didn't have to. Respect isn't supposed to depend on knowing." The sentence landed like a gavel. Outside, the city kept moving horns. Traffic. Life. But inside that room, the world narrowed to one truth. A single act of disdain had rewritten the company's history. 8 hours earlier, Carla Monroe had still been the queen of Sky Nova's premium lounge at Liberty International Airport. She'd walked its marble floors like a stage, heels clicking a rhythm of authority. Her job was to maintain the brand, to decide, with a smile and a glance, who belonged in luxury. That morning she had spotted him quiet, alone, reading in the corner, a black man in a faded bomber jacket and dark jeans, boots that had seen miles. No monogram, no Rolex, no visible claim to status. She remembered thinking, Coach must be full. She would never forget that thought. He had looked up only once, offered a small nod, eyes kind, unreadable. Something about his calm unsettled her. It wasn't defiance, it was presence, the kind she couldn't categorize. And now, 8 hours later, that same man sat behind the desk that used to belong to the CEO of Skynova Airlines. He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He simply told her the story of her own mistake, how a few careless words on Flight 209 had become the catalyst for $1 billion transfer of power, how dignity, when pushed too far, sometimes answered with silence instead of rage. Carla listened, heart sinking. As he finished with a single line, "People remember how you made them feel long after they forget what you were wearing." He turned away, signaling the conversation was over. She rose, unsteady, and walked out into the corridor, past the silent executives, past the polished brass letters that now read Langston Equity Partners, Skynova Division. Behind the closed door, David Langston exhaled, slow and measured. He wasn't proud of what had happened, but he also wasn't sorry. Some lessons had to be written at 35,000 feet before anyone would bother to read them. The hum of Liberty International Airport was different at dawn. It wasn't loud, it breathed, like a great machine stretching awake. Soft announcements echoed from the gates. A man in a bomber jacket sat quietly in the corner of the Skynova first-class lounge, his coffee untouched, eyes tracing the clouds drifting over the runway. David Langston had always loved airports. They smelled of stories and second chances. He used to come here as a kid, pressing his face against the glass while his father worked the maintenance line below. Back then, Skynova wasn't a luxury brand. It was a promise. His father, Charles Langston, wore his blue coveralls with pride, saying, "Son, planes remind us that nothing heavy stays down forever." David smiled at the memory, then opened the worn leather journal on the table. Inside, his father's handwriting curved across the page. "Work with your hands. Lead with your heart." He had followed both instructions, though the world rarely rewarded the second one. That morning, David didn't look like a billionaire. His jacket was faded at the seams, his boots scuffed from a lifetime of walking instead of being chauffeured. He enjoyed this kind of anonymity, the freedom of being no one important. He sipped his coffee slowly, listening to the murmur of conversation around him. Investment talk, vacation plans, self-importance disguised as small talk. A young lounge attendant approached, bright-eyed, new to the job. "Good morning, sir. Would you like a refill?" Her name tag read Emily. Her smile was genuine, not rehearsed. "Thank you, Emily," he said, handing over the cup. "And it's just David." She hesitated. "David." "Got it." Then she added, almost shyly, "It's nice when people smile back here. Most just wave me away." David chuckled. Never underestimate the power of a kind word. "Emily, sometimes it's all that keeps a day from crashing." Emily smiled wider, unaware of how true those words would become before the day ended. From across the lounge, another set of heels clicked against the marble, precise, authoritative, deliberate. The air seemed to tighten as Carla Monroe, Skynova's senior flight attendant, swept in like she owned the space. Her blonde hair was a sculpture, her uniform immaculate, every step calibrated to remind the room who was in charge of luxury. Her eyes scanned the crowd automatically, VIPs, regulars, unknowns. Then they landed on David. For a moment, she didn't recognize him as anything special. Just another traveler, sitting in a corner that didn't belong to him. Her gaze slid over the bomber jacket, the boots, the absence of status symbols. She turned away, but then something in her, the habit of control, made her stop. She turned back. She walked toward him, her perfume sharp, her voice coated in politeness that cut like glass. "Excuse me, sir. May I see your boarding pass?" David lifted his eyes from the journal, calm as still water. "Of course." He slid the ticket across the table. Carla glanced down, expecting coach, but there it was. Sky Nova Flight 209, first class, seat 1A. Her smile twitched. "Just barely. Ah, I see. We appreciate you choosing Sky Nova, Mr. Langston." She lingered on his name, trying to place it. Nothing came. He nodded. "Always appreciated." Her eyes swept the table. The worn leather journal, the coffee cup with lipstick smudged from another traveler who'd borrowed the seat earlier, the bomber jacket. Every detail offended her sense of order. "Well," she said lightly, "if you need anything, our lounge offers complimentary grooming kits and private showers. Some guests prefer to freshen up before boarding." The suggestion hung in the air, gentle on the surface, poisonous beneath. David smiled slightly. "I'll keep that in mind." Carla's tone brightened falsely. "Excellent. Enjoy your stay." She turned, her smile evaporating the moment she faced away. Emily, who had been returning with David's refill, caught the exchange. She hesitated, frowning, then quietly set the cup down and whispered, "Sorry about that." David looked at her, genuinely surprised. "For what?" Emily shrugged. "Some people forget we all bought a ticket for the same sky." He chuckled softly. "You're wise for your age." Emily flushed. "I just don't like it when people assume things." He raised his coffee cup in salute. "Neither do I." As the boarding announcement echoed through the lounge, David stood and stretched. Outside the wide windows, a jet the size of a small building waited, its silver body glinting in the sun. He watched the ground crew in neon vests moving with practiced rhythm, and for a second he imagined his father among them, wrench in hand, smiling up at the sky. Carla's voice cut through his reverie. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now pre-boarding our first-class passengers for Flight 209 to Los Angeles. Please have your boarding passes ready." Her tone shifted back to command mode, all professionalism and polish. But when David approached, she stiffened. Something about his quiet composure unsettled her again. She took his pass with the same 2 fingers she might use to handle something fragile or dirty. "Welcome aboard," she said, with a sweetness too sharp to be kind. David met her eyes and nodded once. "Thank you. Ms. Monroe." She blinked. He had read her name tag. Most passengers didn't bother. For a flicker of a second, she felt exposed. As he walked down the jet bridge, Emily leaned toward Carla and whispered, "He seems nice." Carla's lips tightened. "Maybe, but first class is about image. Let's make sure he understands that." Emily opened her mouth to respond but stopped. The older woman's tone left no space for discussion. "In seat 1A." David placed his bag in the overhead compartment and sat back. The hum of the engines outside was like a heartbeat beneath the metal skin of the plane. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the vibrations through his seat. He thought about the meeting waiting for him in Los Angeles, about the investors and the merger he'd planned. But mostly, he thought about his father again, how Charles had been laid off 3 months before his pension, replaced by automation and a younger supervisor who'd said, "We're moving in a new direction." That phrase had haunted David. He had built his fortune by moving in new directions, too. But he'd never forgotten the look on his father's face that night, a quiet mix of disbelief and dignity. Now, sitting in seat 1A, surrounded by luxury that smelled like money and indifference. David felt that old ache stir again when the intercom crackled to life, announcing final boarding. He looked out the window at the runway, streaked with gold morning light, and whispered to himself, "Let's see if altitude changes anything today." Emily walked by, discreetly placing a linen napkin and glass of water beside his seat. "For you, Mr. Langston." He smiled, and this time she saw it clearly, the calm confidence that came not from wealth, but from knowing exactly who you are. Carla, watching from the galley, saw the same thing, but interpreted it differently. To her, that calm looked like arrogance. In her mind, people in bomber jackets didn't belong in the world she had spent her life curating. What she didn't realize was that the world she guarded so fiercely was about to become his. The jet bridge was cool and humming with the low buzz of machinery. David Langston stepped through, his steps unhurried, his bomber jacket soft against the brushed metal walls. The cabin lights glowed warm gold, and the faint scent of citrus polish hung in the air. It was the kind of quiet luxury Sky Nova sold in its ads Comfort built, for people who believed they had already won the race. David settled into seat 1A, buckled his belt, and placed his leather journal beside him. The hum of the engines was steady, almost calming. The early passengers entered with the practiced ease of people used to being served. Every detail of the cabin whispered perfection: cream leather seats, polished brass accents, glass partitions that reflected soft amber light. Carla Monroe stood at the front of the aisle, her uniform immaculate, her posture flawless. She glanced at the boarding list on her tablet, every name familiar except one: Langston, David. The name didn't spark any recognition. To her, he was a blip, a possible error in the luxury algorithm she curated every day. She leaned toward the younger attendant, Emily Ruiz, who was busy arranging the welcome drinks. "Remember, first class is our stage," Carla murmured. "Every passenger should feel they're among their equals. Presentation matters." Emily nodded. "Of course, but shouldn't comfort matter more?" Carla gave a thin smile. "Comfort is a result, not a right. They feel comfortable when everything looks right. Remember that." Moments later, as boarding finished, she began her ritual, the elegant dance of introductions, personalized greetings, rehearsed smiles. "Mr. Dalton, welcome back. Scotch on the rocks. As always, Mrs. Patel, you're glowing today. The Maldives suit you." Each interaction perfectly pitched, until she reached 1A. David looked up from his journal. His calm eyes met hers with quiet recognition. She hesitated, forcing a polite smile. "Can I offer you something before takeoff, Mr. Langston?" "Just water, thank you," he said. His voice was even, unhurried. She blinked. Most first-class passengers asked for champagne or single malt. Just water. Somehow, that annoyed her more than arrogance would have. She nodded stiffly and walked away, returning a minute later with a plastic bottle. She placed it on his console without a coaster, the bottle rolling slightly as she turned away. David noticed but said nothing. His eyes followed the small cylinder as it spun once, then stopped. He smiled faintly, a smile not of humor but of understanding. The seat beside him, 1B, soon filled with a man in his 60s wearing a tweed jacket and the calm air of someone long retired from rush hours. "Morning," the man said as he sat down, offering a warm handshake. "Harold Bennett. Used to teach history before I realized retirement was the best subject of all." "David Langston," he replied. Harold tilted his head. "You look familiar somehow. Common face." Maybe, David said, amused. Or a memorable one, Harold countered with a grin. The plane began to taxi, engines rumbling deeper. Carla's voice floated through the cabin, smooth and professional, reciting safety instructions as if delivering a sermon on order and grace. Emily stood beside her, repeating motions she had practiced 100 times but never believed in. When the seatbelt sign blinked off, Carla moved down the aisle, checking seatbelts, adjusting pillows. As she neared 1A again, she slowed, her eyes falling once more on David's bomber jacket. It wasn't dirty, just well worn, the kind of fabric that held memories instead of brand names. But to Carla, it was out of place. She stopped beside Emily and spoke just loud enough for others to hear. "Now, Emily, pay attention. Presentation sets the tone. Our guests expect a certain standard in first class. It's not just service, it's environment. We create a visual harmony." Emily froze, realizing too late what was happening. Carla turned slightly, her polished smile fixed, and gestured toward David as if illustrating a point. Sometimes passengers mean well, but forget where they are. It's our job to guide them gently toward the experience they paid for. A few passengers turned their heads. The implication was clear. David felt the weight of their glances like static in the air. He didn't move. He didn't look angry or embarrassed. He simply looked at Carla with the same calm he'd carried into the lounge earlier that morning. His silence was disarming, the kind that reveals more about the speaker than the listener. Harold cleared his throat. "Ms. Monroe, is there a problem?" Carla stiffened, caught off guard. "Of course not, sir. I'm simply demonstrating our service philosophy for our trainee." "Ah," Harold said dryly. "So public shaming is now part of the curriculum." A ripple of nervous laughter drifted through the cabin. Emily's face turned red. Carla's smile faltered. "Perhaps," Harold continued, his voice gentle but cutting, "you might demonstrate kindness next time. It leaves a better impression." Carla drew in a slow breath. "I'll take that under advisement," she said, her tone brittle. She turned sharply and walked back toward the galley. Emily lingered, looking mortified. "Mr. Langston, I'm sorry. She didn't mean," David shook his head softly. "Don't apologize for someone else's lesson. Emily, we all learn in different ways." The rest of the flight settled into uneasy quiet. The clink of glasses, the hum of air vents, the soft shuffle of attendants moving behind curtains. But under that quiet ran a current, a tension that hummed like the engines themselves. David opened his journal again, pretending to write, but his pen stayed still. He wasn't thinking about the insult itself. He was thinking about its roots, how it wasn't just one woman's arrogance, but a culture that had taught her it was acceptable. Skynova sold luxury, but it had forgotten respect. And respect, David thought, was the rarest luxury of all. When lunch service began, Carla returned, her mask of professionalism firmly in place. She leaned toward him, voice cool. "Will you be dining with us, Mr. Langston?" "No, thank you," he said, glancing out the window. Her lips curved in a polite smirk. "Very well. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." "I won't," he said simply. She moved on, unsatisfied. To her, indifference was worse than outrage. Anger, she could control this quiet composure. She could not. Hours later, as the plane cut through calm skies, Emily passed by with coffee. David accepted with a nod. She lingered for a second, then whispered, "You handled that better than anyone I've seen." He smiled, a touch of sadness in his eyes. "Experience, Emily," The higher you climb, the thinner the air gets. Some people can't breathe up here." She nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing something profound beneath his words. When the captain's voice finally announced descent into Los Angeles, the cabin filled with rustling papers, snapping seat belts, and the faint clink of glasses. Carla walked through one last time, perfect once again. She smiled at David, but this time the smile didn't reach her eyes. As the wheels touched down, David closed his journal and slipped it into his bag. His mind was calm, but beneath that calm, something shifted a decision, small but certain. He looked out the window at the tarmac bathed in sunset gold and whispered so quietly no one heard, "Maybe it's time someone rewrites the script." The sky outside the windows burned orange as Sky Nova 209 climbed into open air, the city shrinking beneath a sea of light. From Seat 1A, David Langston watched the horizon stretch endlessly. The hum of the engines was constant, rhythmic, like a giant heart. Around him, the luxury cabin glowed in muted tones, soft jazz playing through hidden speakers, the air thick with perfume and entitlement. Carla Monroe moved through the aisle with practiced elegance, every step calculated. She loved this part of her job, the altitude, the illusion of control, the ability to define comfort for those who paid enough to deserve it. Her uniform hugged her frame like armor, and her smile was the kind that could charm a senator and cut a stranger in the same breath. To her, this cabin wasn't just a workspace, it was a kingdom, and today there was an intruder. David sat quietly, head tilted toward the window. The orange light flickered across his face, illuminating the small creases at the corners of his eyes. His bomber jacket rested over his lap, soft with age, its leather cracked from years of use. Every scratch carried a memory. His father had worn one just like it, working on the underbelly of aircraft long before Sky Nova became a symbol of exclusivity. Carla's gaze swept over him again, irritation prickling beneath her calm. Something about his quietness bothered her. He didn't look impressed by the champagne, the gold-edged menus, the curated playlist. He was unbothered and in Carla's world. That was suspicious. She leaned toward the intercom to call Emily, who was serving drinks 2 rows back. "Emily," she said softly, "join me at the front when you can. There's a teaching opportunity." Emily hesitated, sensing the undertone, but obeyed. When she reached 1A, Carla gestured toward David's seat with a bright, rehearsed smile. "Now, Emily, this is where presentation becomes everything. The first-class cabin is not only about the ticket, it's about the atmosphere we maintain. We represent the Sky Nova standard." Emily nodded uncertainly. Carla continued, her voice a performance. Sometimes, passengers well-meaning, of course don't understand that certain aesthetics help others feel more comfortable. Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward David's bomber jacket. The subtext was sharp enough to cut through the air. Emily's breath caught. "Ms. Monroe." Maybe Carla kept going, smiling wider. "It's not about judging, dear. It's about guiding. After all, image defines experience." A soft cough interrupted her. "Dr." Harold Bennett turned from seat 1B, his gray eyes steady beneath kind brows. "Excuse me," he said, voice calm but firm. "I'm curious, are you teaching hospitality or hierarchy?" The words landed heavy. A few nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. Carla's smile froze, then reformed tighter. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to cause offense." Harold gave a small nod. "You didn't offend me, but you might owe this gentleman an apology." All eyes turned to David. He hadn't moved. He looked at Carla, not angry, just steady. That composure made her uneasy. "That won't be necessary," David said quietly. "Everyone's just doing their job." But his tone carried weight. The calmness wasn't surrender, it was restraint. Carla's cheeks burned. "Of course," she said briskly. "Enjoy your flight." She pivoted and walked back toward the galley, her heels snapping against the floor. Emily lingered for a moment, her face pale. "I'm sorry," she whispered to David. He smiled softly. "No harm done. You learn more by seeing than by being told." When she left, Harold turned to him. "You handled that with grace. I'm not sure I could have." David chuckled, a sound without bitterness. "I've had practice." Harold leaned back, studying him. "You sound like a man who's seen too many of these moments." David's eyes drifted to the window, the clouds glowing beneath the sun. Let's just say, some lessons repeat themselves until someone changes the script. They sat in silence after that. Two men from different worlds united by understanding. From the galley, Carla fumed quietly, replaying the moment over and over. The passenger's calmness felt like defiance, a mirror she couldn't control. She poured herself into the next round of service, her movements sharper than before. Each clink of glass was a small act of penance disguised as professionalism. Hours passed. Dinner trays clattered, cabin lights dimmed, and soft snoring drifted through the aisle. At 35,000 feet, peace seemed possible again. Until the call light pinged from 1A, Carla straightened, her irritation sparking. "Yes, Mr. Langston," she asked, keeping her tone neutral. David looked up. "I just wanted to let you know you've done an excellent job running this cabin." The compliment startled her. "I thank you, sir." He smiled. "You take pride in your work." "That's good. Pride isn't the problem, it's where you place it." His eyes held hers. Not unkind, but with the depth of someone who had spent a lifetime reading people. She didn't know why, but the words unsettled her more than any criticism could have. She nodded stiffly and walked away. "In the back galley," Emily whispered. "What did he say?" Carla shook her head. "Nothing important, but it was important." His tone, calm as it was, had struck something she didn't want to name. By the time the plane began its descent toward Los Angeles, tension lingered like unspent electricity. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in violet and crimson. David closed his eyes, his mind drifting between memory and decision. He thought of his father's hands, scarred from years of work, of his mother's voice, reminding him that dignity was a language the world often refused to translate. He felt the same ache now, the old familiar pulse of quiet injustice, not the kind that screams, but the kind that whispers, again and again, "You don't belong here." The landing gear unfolded with a low groan. Lights flickered back on. Carla resumed her announcements, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed enough to hide the tension in it. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. Local time is 6:47 p.m., and on behalf of SkyNova Airlines, we thank you for flying with us today." When the plane rolled to a stop at the gate, passengers rose in a flurry of movement. Bags came down, jackets slipped on, polite goodbyes murmured. David waited, patient as always. He didn't rush. Carla stood by the cockpit door, smiling automatically as each guest passed. When David reached her, she offered her hand. "Thank you for flying with us. Mr. Langston, I hope you'll join us again soon." He took her hand briefly. "Maybe I will. Maybe I'll even make some changes around here." Her smile faltered just enough for him to notice. She assumed it was a joke. He didn't correct her. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, Emily caught his eye from behind Carla's shoulder and gave him a small, encouraging nod. He returned it with a faint smile. Outside, the cool California air met him like a reset. The city lights glittered in the distance, restless and alive. He walked past the terminal crowd, every step measured, every thought sharpening into purpose. By the time he reached the black sedan waiting for him outside, his phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Lee. Marcus board meeting wrapped early. Ethan Rhodes made another public statement about modern luxury. Investors aren't happy. David's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. Then he typed back, "David, good. Stay awake tonight. We're going to have a long conversation with Sky Nova." The driver opened the car door. David climbed in, the bomber jacket creasing softly as he sat. His reflection in the window looked calm, but beneath that calm, a storm was forming, steady and precise. Tomorrow, the world would wake up to turbulence no pilot could avoid. The night air in Los Angeles carried the scent of salt and rain, even though the forecast had promised clear skies. David Langston stood by the window of his penthouse suite overlooking the city, his reflection superimposed against the glittering skyline. Below, traffic lights pulsed like a heartbeat red, yellow, green, reminding him that movement never stopped, even when people did. He still wore the same bomber jacket, its weight grounding him, its leather faintly creaking when he shifted his shoulders. The room behind him was minimalist, quiet, a sanctuary for someone who needed no decoration to remind him of who he was. On the coffee table, his phone vibrated once. Marcus Lee's name lit up the screen. David answered immediately. "Tell me it's done," he said. "Almost," Marcus replied, his voice sharp but steady. "We've acquired 48%. Singapore closed early, and London confirmed at dawn their time. We'll hit controlling interest by morning." David exhaled, eyes never leaving the horizon. "Good work." Marcus. "No press, no leaks." "Understood. But are you sure you want to go through with this personally? You could easily have the board handle it." David smiled faintly. "They can manage the paperwork. But some lessons," he said softly, "have to be taught in person." When he ended the call, he poured himself a glass of water. No alcohol, no fanfare. His reflection in the glass window flickered as lightning flared far off the coast. He wasn't angry. Anger had long burned out of him, replaced by something colder resolve. The humiliation from that flight had not been unique. It had simply been the latest reminder of how invisible dignity could be to people blinded by comfort. He turned and walked to the desk, where his father's journal lay open. He traced the old handwriting with one finger. "Work with your hands, lead with your heart." Charles Langston had believed in fixing things, not breaking them. But sometimes, David thought, you had to dismantle something completely before rebuilding it right. Downstairs, in the hotel's executive lounge, a few guests still lingered over drinks. The television above the bar played the late-night business news. A reporter's voice cut through the soft background jazz and breaking news. Sources close to Langston Equity Partners suggest the firm may be preparing a major acquisition within the aviation sector. Neither Langston Equity nor Sky Nova Airlines has issued a comment. David smiled slightly. He hadn't needed to speak. The markets always did the talking. Across the country, in New York. Ethan Rhodes, the CEO of Sky Nova, was just waking up to a barrage of messages and missed calls. He squinted at the screen, irritation flaring as he scrolled through financial alerts, stock volatility, suspicious purchasing patterns, Langston Equity. He threw back his sheets, grabbed his phone, and called his assistant. Get legal. And PR. Now. By the time the first light touched Manhattan, Skynova's tower buzzed with panic. No one yet knew the name behind the takeover, but whispers spread through corridors like wildfire. David, meanwhile, remained still, watching the sun rise over Los Angeles. He had never wanted revenge. It was too small a word for what this was. What he wanted was reform, something that would outlast the anger of a moment. He dressed simply dark slacks, white shirt, no tie, and took the elevator down to the lobby. The doorman greeted him by name, unaware that the man before him now controlled the skies above their heads. "Good morning, Mr. Langston," the doorman said. "Morning, Alan. Looks like rain." The man glanced up, surprised. "Forecast says clear." David smiled. Forecast change. An hour later, he was seated in the back of a black sedan, his laptop open. Marcus appeared on the screen from New York, looking slightly disheveled but energized. All signatures complete. Marcus reported 54.3% ownership confirmed, effective immediately. David nodded. "Then call an emergency meeting for 8 a.m. Eastern. I'll be there. You'll fly." He closed the laptop. "No," he said quietly. "I think I'll use Skynova's conference line. It feels appropriate." At that moment, Carla Monroe was just stepping off another early morning flight back into Newark. The trip had been long, the night restless. She'd barely slept after that uncomfortable scene with the man in seat 1A. His calmness had lingered in her mind like an echo. She'd tried to shake it off, telling herself it was nothing a misunderstanding, a minor discomfort, but deep down, she knew the shame wasn't leaving. As she walked through the crew terminal, her phone buzzed with messages. "Did you hear something big's happening? Skynova stock is tanking. Emergency memo coming down from HQ." She frowned, typing a quick reply to a coworker. "Any details?" The answer came almost instantly. Just one name, Langston Equity. Carla stopped mid-step. The name hit like turbulence. Her breath caught as she remembered the face, the quiet voice, the jacket that seemed suddenly symbolic of everything she had misjudged. By the time she reached the employee exit, the intercom overhead was already calling for management staff to report to the main office. She didn't move. The world around her felt as though it had tilted slightly. Meanwhile, across the country. David entered the private meeting room at the Los Angeles office. A wall of screens lit up, showing the anxious faces of Skynova's executive board. Ethan Rhodes sat at the center, his usual arrogance replaced by confusion and disbelief. "Mr. Langston," Ethan began, forcing a polite tone. "This acquisition was unexpected." David's image flickered on the main screen. Calm, composed. "Unexpected," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes. I suppose that's how turbulence feels, too." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "What exactly is your intention here?" "My intention," David said evenly, "is simple. I believe in rebuilding what your company forgot respect. It's amazing what collapses when you remove it." A murmur rippled across the conference line. Some board members looked uneasy, others intrigued. Ethan forced a laugh. "You're talking about culture, Mr. Langston. We're talking about aviation." "They're the same thing," David replied. "Culture is what keeps things in the air when engines fail." Silence filled the room. He leaned closer to the camera, voice low but carrying steel. "Effective immediately. Skynova's leadership will undergo restructuring. A new code of conduct will be issued, and every staff member, from pilots to executives, will undergo ethics and inclusion retraining. The era of selective hospitality is over. Ethan's jaw tightened. You can't just Aiken, David interrupted, his voice firm. I own this airline now. For a long second, no one moved. Then Ethan leaned back, defeated, understood. When the call ended, David closed the laptop. He didn't smile. Power. He knew. Wasn't victory. It was responsibility. He looked out the window again. The storm that had threatened earlier now broke across the city in gentle sheets of rain, or washing the glass in silver. He thought of Carla Monroe, not with anger, but with quiet certainty. There was one more meeting to be had later that night, as the city lights reflected in puddles outside the Sky Nova Tower. A new memo circulated through every department mandatory briefing for all senior staff. Attendance required. Carla read it twice, her hands trembling slightly. At the bottom of the message was a signature she would never forget. The world was waking to headlines it didn't yet understand. By 7 a.m, every major business outlet was reporting the same impossible phrase, Sky Nova Airlines acquired overnight by Langston Equity Partners. Anchors repeated the words with disbelief. Analysts filled airtime with speculation, and employees in airports across the country scrolled their phones, trying to piece together what had happened while they slept. In a quiet corner of the Newark Crew Lounge, Carla Monroe sat frozen, her tablet screen glowing with the official memo. The words blurred as her mind tried to catch up effective immediately. Mr. David Langston assumes the role of chairman and CEO of Sky Nova Airlines following a majority acquisition. Her throat went dry. She read it again, slower this time, but the meaning didn't change. The man in the bomber jacket, the one she had subtly humiliated, the one who had thanked her with unsettling calm, now owned everything. Emily Ruiz slipped into the lounge, clutching a paper cup of coffee, eyes wide. Carla. Did you see? Carla didn't look up. Yes, it's him, isn't it? The man from Flight 209? Carla swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about, but she did. Every detail of that flight replayed in her head, the look in his eyes, the silence after her comment, the way he'd said, pride isn't the problem, it's where you place it. Now she understood what he'd meant. Across the country, in Los Angeles, David Langston stood in a private conference room overlooking the morning haze. The city below was a blur of movement traffic streaming like veins through a living body. He held a phone to his ear, his tone even but firm. Marcus, I want it timed perfectly, he said. Internal announcement first, press second. The board will follow our lead. Marcus's voice crackled through the line. Already in motion, the new leadership structure is being uploaded to the intranet. And David, the markets are responding. Sky Nova's valuation has jumped 8% since the news broke. Good, David said, pacing slowly. Money will get their attention. But I want their conscience, too. You think that's possible? Marcus asked. David smiled faintly. Everything's possible once people realize someone's watching. He ended the call and sat down, opening his father's old journal again. The pages smelled faintly of oil and dust. He read a line he'd underlined years ago. Sometimes, fixing a broken system means grounding it first. He closed the book and whispered, Time to ground them. Back in Newark, chaos rippled through Sky Nova headquarters. Executives scrambled into early meetings, their polished shoes clicking on marble floors that suddenly felt less stable. Ethan Rhodes, the now former CEO, stormed through the corridor like a man walking on a sinking ship. Who authorized this? He barked at his assistant. Who gave Langston access? Sir, it's not a merger. It's an acquisition. He bought us. Outright. Ethan stopped cold, as though the air had been punched from his lungs. Bought us. That's impossible. He can't, but the truth was already written on the stock ticker, scrolling across the lobby screen. Langston Equity Majority Shareholder, Sky Nova. When David's private jet landed at Teterboro that afternoon, the sky was a flawless blue. The car waiting on the tarmac whisked him directly to Manhattan. From the back seat, he could see the glimmering crown of Sky Nova Tower rising above the skyline like a monument to arrogance. It looked smaller than he remembered. As he entered the building, staff stopped mid-step, unsure whether to greet him or to stare. He gave them a simple nod and walked straight to the top-floor conference suite. The same room where years ago his father's termination letter had been signed. Now it belonged to him. The board members were already assembled when he entered. Ethan Rhodes sat at the far end, his expression tight with forced civility. "Mr. Langston," Ethan said. "Standing. I suppose congratulations are in order, though I must say, this is highly unconventional." David set his briefcase down and met his gaze calmly. Unconventional doesn't mean unearned. Ethan's jaw clenched. "You've made your point. You've proven you can buy influence. But if you think you can run an airline, you'll find it's not as easy as trading shares." David smiled faintly. "Running an airline isn't the challenge. Fixing what's broken in it is." He turned toward the others. "I didn't buy Sky Nova for profit. I bought it because too many people here forgot that customers aren't props in your brand story. They're people. You built an empire on polish, not respect. That ends today." A ripple of uneasy silence spread through the room. Ethan scoffed. "You think you can build a culture on kindness that doesn't sell first-class seats?" David looked at him steadily. "It sells loyalty, and right now, Sky Nova has none." No one dared to respond. After the meeting, David stood alone by the window, watching the city below. The glass reflected his face alongside the skyline, a man shaped by quiet endurance, not by rage. Behind him, Marcus entered quietly. "It's done," Marcus said. "The press release is live. Social media is exploding. They're calling it the most poetic acquisition of the decade." David chuckled. "Poetic. That's one word for it. Are you going to address the staff tomorrow morning?" he said. "But there's someone I want to speak with first." Marcus didn't ask who. He already knew. That evening, Carla Monroe received a message marked "Confidential," executive meeting invitation, the sender office of the chairman. Her stomach twisted as she read the date and time, 8:00 a.m., Sky Nova Tower, Conference Room 62, attendance mandatory. She barely slept that night. Her reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar. Eyes ringed with fatigue, confidence fractured. She kept rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd explain, how she'd apologize if given the chance. But every version of her speech sounded smaller than the moment she feared awaited her. When dawn broke, she dressed carefully. The uniform felt heavier than usual. The scarf around her neck felt like a reminder instead of an accessory. By 7:45, she stood outside the glass doors of the 62nd floor conference room. Through them, she could see the skyline stretching in morning gold. David Langston stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, the same bomber jacket folded neatly on a nearby chair. He turned as the doors opened. His expression was unreadable. "Ms. Monroe," he said softly. "Thank you for coming." She swallowed. "Mr. Langston." He gestured for her to sit. "We'll talk soon. For now, I'd like you to listen." Around the table, Executives sat in tense silence as David addressed them. He spoke not like a man claiming power, but like one reclaiming principle. Sky Nova was built to connect people. Somewhere along the way, connection became hierarchy. We decided who looked the part, who fit the image, who deserved comfort. That mindset doesn't just hurt passengers, it poisons everyone who works here. His gaze landed briefly on Carla, not with cruelty, but with truth. We can't claim to fly above others while looking down on them. When the meeting ended, Carla remained seated, her hands trembling. David approached quietly. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice calm, "walk with me." She followed him down the corridor lined with portraits of past executives, all men in expensive suits, all smiling the same hollow smile. He stopped near the elevator. "You made a mistake," he said finally. "But I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because I think you can learn from it." Tears welled in her eyes, surprising her. "You should have fired me." He shook his head. "No, you don't change a system by cutting out symptoms. You change it by transforming people who once upheld it." He pressed the elevator button. "Tomorrow, you'll receive a new assignment. I want you to lead a training initiative, one focused on empathy, inclusion, and real hospitality. It'll be called the Langston Program. Think of it as your second flight." Carla's voice broke. "Why me?" "Because redemption belongs to those brave enough to face their reflection," he said gently. "You've already started." As the elevator doors opened, she whispered, "Thank you." David nodded once. "Don't thank me. Just do better. That's how we fix the skies." When she left, David returned to the window. The city stretched out before him, alive and imperfect. Somewhere in the distance, a plane cut across the clouds, its silver body glinting in the sun. He thought of his father again, of how he'd once said, "Son, someday you'll find yourself high above the world. Remember, it's not the altitude that defines you, but the attitude." David smiled quietly. He finally understood. When the first morning rays poured over Manhattan, Sky Nova Tower shimmered like a blade of glass cutting into the sky. Inside, the energy had shifted entirely. Overnight, a company that once defined luxury through exclusion now stood on the brink of transformation. Employees moved through the halls, whispering, uncertain if they were witnessing history or losing control of it. The name David Langston had become both legend and warning. On the top floor, the elevator chimed softly, and David stepped out with quiet purpose. He wore no tie, no designer watch, just a crisp white shirt and that familiar bomber jacket slung over his arm. He didn't need symbols of power anymore. He carried something far heavier, the responsibility of change. In the conference suite, a handful of executives waited nervously. Among them sat Ethan Rhodes, his usual confidence drained, and Carla Monroe, seated near the end of the long glass table. Her eyes were downcast, her uniform perfect, but her posture subdued. David entered without ceremony and stood at the head of the table. The skyline behind him glowed pale gold. "Good morning," he said simply. No one replied. He looked around the room, eyes calm but sharp. "I know this company has built its reputation on control, precision, image, but somewhere along the way, those things replaced purpose. Sky Nova forgot why it existed to connect people, not divide them. We're going to change that." He paused. The silence was taut, heavy with expectation. "This isn't a speech," he continued. "It's an invitation. Some of you will stay and help me rebuild. Others will leave. Either choice is fine. But from today forward, every decision we make will answer one question. Does it honor dignity? If it doesn't fly. Ethan exhaled sharply, unable to hold back. You talk about dignity as if it pays for fuel, Mr. Langston. Airlines run on profit, not poetry. David smiled faintly. Profit is what happens when you serve people well enough for them to come back. We've been serving egos, not hearts. That's expensive, even if it looks rich. A few executives exchanged glances, some intrigued, others skeptical. He turned toward Carla. Ms. Monroe, you'll be overseeing the new Langston program. We'll start training within a month. Empathy workshops, inclusive leadership sessions, frontline storytelling. Every employee will go through it, including pilots and management. Carla's voice trembled slightly. Understood. He nodded once, acknowledging her effort to stay composed. You'll report directly to me, not as punishment, but as partnership. I trust you'll make it meaningful. A flicker of gratitude passed across her face. When the meeting adjourned, journalists were already waiting outside the building, cameras flashing as soon as the doors opened. David stepped out first, the noise swelling instantly. Questions flew like hail. Mr. Langston, is it true you purchased Sky Nova overnight? Was this a revenge move? What happens to the current CEO? David lifted a hand slightly, quieting the chaos. His voice carried steady through the morning air. No revenge, just reform. The skies belong to everyone, and they should reflect everyone who flies them. The sound bites spread across networks within minutes. By noon, hashtags like "For Langston Sky" and "More New Flight Ethic" were trending nationwide. Some praised him as a visionary. Others mocked him as naive. But no one ignored him. Meanwhile, Carla retreated to a small office on the 38th floor, one that had been hastily cleared for her new role. The nameplate on the door read Langston Program, Director's Office. It still felt unreal. She sank into the chair and looked out at the city far below. For the first time in years, she didn't feel above it. She felt part of it. A knock on the door pulled her back. Emily Ruiz stepped in, smiling shyly. Mr. Langston asked me to assist you, she said. Carla blinked. Yes, he said. The people who understand kindness best should be the ones teaching it. For a moment, Carla couldn't speak. She had expected isolation, not trust. Thank you, Emily. She managed. We'll need a lot of help. Emily nodded. We'll start by listening. Maybe we ask employees to share stories times they felt unseen or disrespected. If we can make them remember that feeling, they'll never inflict it again. Carla looked at her, surprised by the depth of the idea. That's good, really good. Emily smiled faintly. Mr. Langston said change starts with conversation, not command. Later that afternoon, David walked the terminal floor at Liberty International. He had declined press coverage for this visit, preferring to observe quietly. As he passed the Sky Nova counter, travelers lined up for boarding. Some were frustrated, some tired, but most were just people trying to get somewhere. He noticed a janitor pushing a cleaning cart nearby, humming softly to himself. The man's uniform bore a faded Sky Nova patch. David stopped and asked, How long have you worked here? 22 years, sir, the man said, surprised anyone was asking. Longer than most planes last. David smiled. Then you've seen everything. The man chuckled. Everything worth fixing. Maybe. David nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. He shook the man's hand before leaving. Simple gestures. Genuine exchanges. They were the real flight path to change. By evening, the news cycle had reached a fever pitch. Television anchors debated his leadership, some calling it revolutionary, others dismissing it as performative. But what mattered most to David wasn't the media. It was the message, inside the tower. Marcus entered his office with a folder of reports. The numbers looked promising. He said, "Employee morale's already shifting. It's early, but they're starting to believe." David glanced at the window, where the city's lights glowed like constellations. "Belief is the first altitude," he said quietly. "Everything else follows." Marcus hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever think your father would approve of this?" David's gaze softened. "He'd probably tell me I'm overthinking it. Then he'd hand me a wrench and tell me to get to work." Marcus smiled. "Maybe that's exactly what you're doing." Hours later, when the building finally emptied, David remained in his office alone. The city outside pulsed with night energy, but inside, the quiet was absolute. He opened his father's journal again, rereading old entries, his thumb tracing the faded ink. One line stood out. "This time power doesn't show who you are. It shows whether you remember who made you." He closed the book, whispering, "I remember." At that same hour, Carla stood on the rooftop terrace, her hair catching the wind. The city shimmered below, each light a reminder of countless lives she'd once overlooked. For the first time in years, she felt small, and that smallness was humbling, not humiliating. Emily joined her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Long day," Emily said softly. Carla smiled. "The longest, and somehow the best. Do you think people can really change?" Emily asked. Carla thought for a moment. "Only if they want to, and only if someone believes they can." From the floor above, David stepped out onto his own balcony. The wind carried the faint echo of their voices. He looked up at the moon, its light silvering the clouds, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, not vindication, but peace. Tomorrow would bring challenges, criticism, maybe even failure. But tonight, the sky felt open again. The story of one man's humiliation had become the blueprint for an entire industry's awakening. And somewhere, high above the city, a single plane traced a white line across the dark, carrying ordinary passengers toward extraordinary horizons. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, clouds hanging low over Manhattan as if the city itself was holding its breath. Inside Sky Nova Tower, the elevators hummed with urgency. Employees dressed sharper than usual, whispers of uncertainty trailing through every corridor. There were rumors of a second announcement, something larger than the first. No one knew what to expect, but everyone felt that the air had changed denser, charged, waiting for something to break. On the 62nd floor, the top conference suite stood ready. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out across the skyline, where the fog blurred the outlines of skyscrapers like ghosts of old ambition. A long glass table gleamed beneath soft lights. At one end, a single folder waited with Sky Nova's new emblem embossed on its cover, a stylized wing intertwined with the letter L. The name beneath read, "Langston Equity Partners." David Langston entered quietly, his reflection trailing in the glass behind him. He looked calm, but purposeful, the kind of composure that came from deep conviction, not performance. Marcus Lee followed, carrying a tablet, his expression alert. "Everything's ready," Marcus said. "The board's assembled. Media's restricted. You'll have privacy for this." David nodded. "Good. Let's get it done." One by one, the executives filed in. Some carried the same skepticism they'd shown the day before. while others carried curiosity, even hope. That day Carla Monroe entered last. Her uniform was immaculate, but her demeanor was different now, still proud, yet softened by humility. She took a seat quietly, eyes lowered. When everyone settled, David remained standing. "I appreciate you being here," he began, voice steady. "Yesterday was about announcing change. Today is about proving it." He paused, letting the room breathe. Skynova's reputation wasn't built overnight, and it won't be repaired overnight. But I intend to make sure it's not just repaired, it's reborn. The words carried not the force of authority, but the weight of promise. He continued, "In the next year, we'll implement structural reforms across all departments: training, ethics, hiring. But before that, I need to address something deeper: culture. No business survives if its soul is broken." Ethan Rhodes, still nursing his pride, leaned forward slightly. "Culture doesn't fill seats. Langston, you can't quantify soul in an earnings report." David met his gaze calmly. "Maybe not, but you can measure the cost of ignoring it: lawsuits, scandals, resignations, and reputations destroyed. Those numbers, you understand." A few board members nodded. Ethan sat back, silent. David motioned toward Carla. "Ms. Monroe, would you please stand?" The room went still. Carla rose slowly, uncertain. "Yesterday," David said, "I appointed Ms. Monroe as director of the Langston program. Some of you questioned that decision. You thought it was risky to promote someone connected to controversy. But here's what I believe: accountability means transformation, not exile." Ms. Monroe faced her mistake. Now she'll help others recognize theirs before they make them. Carla's voice wavered slightly as she spoke. "I don't deserve this trust, but I intend to earn it." David nodded. "You already started the moment you admitted that." The silence that followed was thick with reflection. People shifted in their chairs, the air heavy with the realization that a new kind of leadership had entered the building, one that didn't shout or threaten, but revealed truth by standing quietly in it. Then David opened the folder in front of him and spread several documents across the table. "We'll start with transparency. Every complaint filed by an employee or passenger in the last 3 years will be reviewed independently. The process won't be internal. It'll be overseen by an external ethics board. We'll rebuild trust, not with slogans, but with systems," Marcus added. "We're also launching a new scholarship fund for underrepresented youth interested in aviation. It'll be named after Charles Langston." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Carla's hand instinctively went to her chest, touched by the quiet grace of it. David's voice softened. "My father worked on planes for 25 years. He believed everyone deserved the chance to rise, no matter where they started. That's what this company should stand for." The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Then Ethan spoke again, his tone more cautious than confrontational. "You've made your point, Mr. Langston. But if you rebuild this company into something unfamiliar, what happens to the people who've built their lives around the old version? Are they just relics?" David studied him for a long moment before replying. "That depends. Do they want to defend a brand? Or do they want to serve humanity? Because one of those things is fading fast." No one dared to respond. When the meeting ended, the executives left in thoughtful silence. Only David and Carla remained behind. She hesitated near the door. "You said you'd prove change," she said softly. "How will you know it's real?" David looked out at the city below, where the fog had begun to lift, revealing sunlight cutting through the gray. When passengers start telling stories about kindness instead of complaints about comfort, he said. "That's when I'll know." Later that day, word of the meeting leaked to the press, not through gossip or scandal, but through quiet admiration. An intern posted a single line on social media. "Our new CEO spoke about dignity for 40 minutes and never once said the word profit." Maybe the skies are changing. The post went viral. Within hours, journalists picked it up, spinning it into headlines that read, "Langston redefines leadership, respect takes flight." Meanwhile, back in the training division, Carla and Emily worked late into the evening, outlining the first modules for the Langston program. They filled whiteboards with words like empathy, active listening, and representation. Emily looked at the list and smiled. "It doesn't look like airline training. It looks like humanity training." Carla laughed softly. "That's the idea." She paused, then added, "You know, I used to think first class meant perfection, but maybe it's just the ability to make someone feel seen." Emily nodded. "You're learning fast." Carla smiled faintly. "Or finally?" "Upstairs." David's office glowed dimly against the twilight. Marcus entered quietly, holding a single sheet of paper. "This just came in," he said, setting it on the desk. "Passenger feedback report from last quarter. Do you want to see it?" David looked at the paper but didn't touch it. "Not yet. Let's create something worth measuring first." Marcus studied him for a moment, then asked, "What's next?" David leaned back, his eyes drifting toward the skyline. "Next, we open the doors wider. The public sees what's inside a company, not what it advertises. I want Sky Nova to become the standard that forces everyone else to rise." "You're turning this into a movement," Marcus said quietly. David shook his head. "No, I'm just reminding people how to be human again." When Marcus left, David stood alone by the window. Below, the streets glowed like rivers of light. He thought about that flight seat 1A, the cold water bottle rolling across the table, Carla's polished smile, Harold's quiet defense. Every moment had led to this. He whispered to himself, "Altitude doesn't change who we are. It just shows how far our hearts can reach." As he watched another plane streak across the evening sky, its silver wings catching the sun's last flame, he smiled. For the first time, the sky didn't feel like distance. It felt like connection. Tomorrow would bring scrutiny, obstacles, and resistance. But tonight, the city hummed with the first quiet proof that change had begun. 3 weeks after the takeover, Sky Nova Airlines no longer felt like the same company. The old posters with glossy, smiling models were gone. The sterile advertisements promising excellence above the clouds had been replaced by something simpler photos of real employees. Handwritten quotes beneath them, "We see you. We hear you. We fly with you." The slogan wasn't corporate, it was human. In the cafeteria, workers who once avoided speaking to management now shared tables with executives. The atmosphere was lighter, almost hopeful, as though the air itself had shed the stiffness of hierarchy. Still, David Langston knew it was only the beginning. Reform wasn't a press release. It was 1,000 tiny choices, made day by day. That morning, Marcus entered David's office holding a cream envelope. "This came in through the corporate mail," he said, "addressed to you personally. No return name." David took it, turning the envelope over in his hands. The handwriting was neat but old-fashioned. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Mr. Langston, you don't know me, but I was on Flight 209 sitting 3 rows behind you the day the incident happened. I saw what that attendant said. I saw how calm you stayed when most of us would have exploded. I thought about speaking up, but I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it wasn't my problem. But watching what's happened since, I realize silence is part of the problem. So this letter is my apology and my thanks. You turned humiliation into change. That's the kind of leadership this world forgets it needs. Sincerely, a passenger who finally learned something at 35,000 feet. David read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it on his desk. His jaw tightened not from anger, but from the quiet ache of recognition. That letter wasn't just from one person. It was from everyone who had looked away, everyone who had stayed silent while dignity was bruised. Marcus watched him. "You okay?" David nodded slowly. "Better than okay." "This is why we're doing it." "Want me to publish it internally?" David thought for a moment. "No, not yet. Let's earn a few more like it first." Later that day, he attended one of the first Langston program sessions in the training center. Carla Monroe stood at the front of the room, her voice steady but warm. "Today isn't about policy," she told the group of attendants and gate agents. "It's about perception. How you see people before you speak to them, before you decide who they are." The trainees listened, some skeptical, others deeply moved. Carla shared her own story, not the polished corporate version, but the raw truth. She described how her arrogance had cost her compassion, how a moment of pride had nearly ended her career. "I thought I was protecting a brand," she said quietly, "but I was just protecting my prejudice." When the session ended, a young attendant lingered behind. "Ms. Monroe," she said hesitantly, "I used to think being professional meant being distant. Now I'm not so sure." Carla smiled gently. "Professionalism isn't distance. It's discipline. The discipline to treat people with respect, even when no one's watching." Outside the classroom, Emily Ruiz stood by the doorway, watching with quiet pride. When Carla joined her, Emily said, "You're getting good at this." Carla shook her head. "No, I'm just finally telling the truth." Meanwhile, upstairs, the boardroom filled once more. David faced his new leadership team diverse, sharp, and newly appointed. Among them were veterans from within Skynova and new hires from other industries' educators, community organizers, even a psychologist. Ethan Rhodes had resigned quietly the week before. His absence left an unexpected calm. Marcus began the meeting by presenting data. Customer feedback is up 37%. Social media sentiment positive. Employee engagement highest in a decade. Investors are cautious, but intrigued. David leaned back, thoughtful. Cautious is fine, as long as they're watching. Then he addressed the room. "We're not chasing applause. We're building endurance. The real test comes when the world moves on, when we're no longer trending. That's when we'll know if this culture sticks." A young manager raised her hand. "How do we keep people from slipping back into old habits?" David smiled faintly. "By rewarding the new ones. Praise integrity, not image. Recognize service, not sales. Culture is what people repeat without being told to." That afternoon, Carla was called to David's office. She entered hesitantly, unsure why. He gestured toward a chair. "Sit," he said gently. On his desk lay the letter. "I want you to read this." Carla read in silence, the words sinking deep. When she finished, she looked up, eyes shining. "Someone saw it all happen," she whispered. "Someone who didn't speak up," David said softly. "But now they did. People are watching us, Carla, and when they see grace instead of revenge, they learn something bigger than rules." She nodded slowly. "You're teaching us how to lead without hate?" David smiled faintly. "You're the one teaching now." The next day, David visited Liberty International again. No entourage, no press. Just himself, walking through the terminal. Passengers hurried past, unaware that the man adjusting his jacket near Gate 12 owned the airline they were boarding. He paused when he saw a young boy sitting near the window, watching planes take off. The boy's father sat beside him, explaining the mechanics of flight. "See, son, when the engines push air backward, the plane moves forward." David smiled at the simplicity of it. Forward through resistance. That was the lesson of every life worth living. As he turned to leave, the father looked up and recognized him. "Miss Langston," he said, astonished. Your David put a finger to his lips, smiling. "Just a traveler today." The man nodded respectfully, eyes bright with admiration. "You changed something, sir. My wife works for your airline. She says it's different now. She comes home proud again." David's throat tightened. "Tell her that's all I ever wanted." That night, Sky Nova released a short video message titled, "The Sky Belongs to Everyone." It showed employees sharing their stories. A ground crew member who'd been ignored for years now mentoring trainees. A pilot who admitted he'd once judged passengers by their seats. A flight attendant who learned to apologize without being told to. The final frame showed David standing on the tarmac at sunrise, the wind tugging at his jacket. His voice played over the image, quiet but strong. "We don't rise by pushing others down. We rise by lifting together. Every altitude begins on the ground." The video went viral overnight. Millions watched, not for spectacle, but for sincerity. The comments filled with gratitude, reflection, and tears. Strangers wrote that they'd been inspired to speak up against prejudice at work, to treat others with patience, to start again. Back at headquarters, Carla sat at her desk, scrolling through the messages. One comment caught her eye. "I used to be like that flight attendant. I judge people too fast. But now I'm trying to see beyond clothes. Thank you, whoever you are." She smiled softly, whispering, "You're welcome." As the weeks turned into months, the transformation of Sky Nova became case study material at business schools and leadership forums. Analysts called it the Langston effect, the fusion of empathy and accountability as a new model for corporate ethics. But David didn't care about the headlines. He cared about the letters. Every few days, another arrived stories from passengers, employees, strangers. He kept them all in a wooden box on his desk, each one a testament that dignity, once lost, could still be found. One evening, long after everyone had gone home, he opened his father's journal again. The final page was blank, waiting. He took a pen and wrote carefully across it, "Dad, you taught me how to fix engines. I finally learned how to fix hearts. We're flying higher now together." He closed the book and looked out at the city, its lights shimmering like stars on the ground. Somewhere, a Sky Nova plane ascended into the dark, its trail glowing faintly against the night. David whispered to himself, "For every person who's ever been told they don't belong, this is for you." It wasn't revenge that changed the skies. It was redemption. 6 months later, winter had returned to New York, and with it came a soft hush over the city. The towers glistened under a thin veil of frost, and the air was crisp, the kind that made every breath feel clean and deliberate. Inside Sky Nova Tower, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to quiet pride. The transformation wasn't complete change, never truly is, but something had taken root. The company now pulsed with a different rhythm, humility instead of hierarchy, sincerity instead of slogans. David Langston stood by the window of his corner office, looking out at the skyline blanketed in pale gold sunlight. On his desk sat a stack of letters tied together with a blue ribbon, the newest additions to his growing collection of stories from passengers and employees alike. He ran a hand over them, smiling faintly. Each one told of a small victory, a gate agent who helped a nervous traveler, a mechanic who stopped to listen to a janitor's idea, a pilot who apologized to a crying child for a delay. They were ordinary acts, but together they formed a tapestry of decency. Marcus entered quietly, holding 2 travel itineraries. Morning flight to Chicago, he said. They're launching the Langston program at O'Hare today. Press will be there. You sure you don't want me to handle it? David shook his head. No. This one I should see myself. Marcus smiled knowingly. You've come full circle back in the air again. David chuckled softly. Seems fitting. A few hours later, at Liberty International. The terminal buzzed with travelers wrapped in coats, dragging suitcases across the polished floor. Skynova's branding gleamed in soft blues and silvers refined, but approachable. Beneath one of the signs, a new motto shimmered. Flight begins with respect. David walked through the terminal unnoticed at first. The simple clothes helped: black sweater, jeans, no entourage. But then a gate agent spotted him, whispering to a colleague, and soon murmurs followed him like ripples in water. He nodded politely to those who recognized him, never breaking stride. At Gate 9, Carla Monroe waited beside the jet bridge, clipboard in hand. She'd traded her uniform for a navy blazer embroidered with the Langston program insignia. Morning, Mr. Langston, she said warmly. Morning, Carla, he replied. How's the training rollout? Her eyes lit up. Better than I ever imagined. People are starting to believe they're part of something bigger than themselves. It's different now. David smiled. That's the best thing you could have said. He boarded first, taking his seat quietly in row 3A ironically, the same seat number from the incident that started everything. The symmetry didn't escape him. He settled in, watching passengers file past a mother calming her child, an elderly man carefully placing his hat in the overhead bin, a young couple whispering excitedly about their honeymoon. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the cabin. Emily Ruis was among them now, confident and composed, her badge gleaming. She greeted each passenger by name, her tone genuine. When she reached David's row, she smiled, eyes twinkling. Good morning, Mr. Langston. Or should I say, fellow traveler. David grinned. Traveler works just fine. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Thank you for everything. He nodded. Keep it flying. Emily? The plane taxied smoothly, engines humming. As they lifted into the gray winter sky, David felt a quiet sense of peace. He hadn't flown since that day, not as a passenger. Back then, altitude had felt like isolation, a place where prejudice followed you, no matter how high you climbed. Now, it felt like release. As the plane leveled, Emily made her way down the aisle, handing out coffee. She stopped by a seat. Would you like some? David took the cup with a small smile. Thank you. A man across the aisle, dressed in a tailored suit, glanced over. You look familiar, he said. Do I know you from somewhere? David hesitated, then smiled. I don't think so. I'm just passing through. The man shrugged. Well, good to see the airline improving. Used to be they treated people like luggage. Now, everyone seems happier. David's eyes softened. That's the goal. The man nodded approvingly. Whoever's running things now deserves a medal. David took a slow sip of his coffee, hiding a faint smile. I'll make sure they hear that. Mid-flight. Turbulence rolled through the cabin, brief but jarring. A few passengers gasped. Emily steadied herself, moving down the aisle with calm assurance. It's okay, folks. Just a few bumps. We'll be clear in a moment. Her voice carried warmth and certainty, the kind that made strangers trust her instantly. David watched, quietly proud. Leadership, he thought, wasn't always at the top of a tower. Sometimes it walked down an aisle at 35,000 feet, carrying a tray and a kind word. When the plane landed in Chicago, applause broke out spontaneously, a small human gesture of gratitude. David stayed seated, waiting until the others disembarked. Emily approached. "You're not heading out in a minute," he said. "I like watching people leave happy." She smiled. "We owe that to you." He shook his head. "You owe it to yourselves." Outside. The cold wind hit his face as he stepped onto the jet bridge. Cameras flashed near the gate press and local media gathering for the O'Hare program launch. Marcus stood nearby, holding a folder. "Ready?" he asked. David looked out at the runway, where another Skynova jet was preparing for takeoff. Always. They entered the terminal auditorium, where employees, reporters, and guests waited. Carla took the podium first, introducing the Langston program to applause. "We've learned that hospitality isn't about hierarchy, it's about humanity," she said. "And thanks to one man's courage, we've rewritten what flight means." When she gestured for David to speak, the room rose in unison. The applause was thunderous, not out of celebrity, but out of shared purpose. David approached the podium slowly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. 6 months ago, I sat on a plane and watched dignity get dismissed. I didn't plan a revolution. That day, I just refused to believe humiliation was normal. The truth is, we all have power, whether we wear a uniform or not. Power to notice, to speak, to do what's right. That's what keeps us aloft. He paused, scanning the faces before him. Skynova isn't mine, it's ours. It belongs to every person who boards, every worker who lifts a bag, every attendant who chooses kindness when it would be easier not to. If you take one thing from this, let it be this real flight doesn't happen in the sky. It happens right here. He placed his hand over his heart when we remember each other. The room erupted in applause again, not just for him, but for what they had all become part of. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, a small boy approached with his mother. The boy held a toy plane and looked up shyly. "Are you the man who made the sky fair again?" he asked. David knelt, meeting his eyes. "I didn't make it fair," he said gently. "I just reminded it how to be." The boy grinned and handed him the toy plane. "You can borrow mine if you ever need to fly again." David's chest tightened. "Thank you," he said softly, as the mother led her son away. David turned toward the window. Outside, planes glided against the orange horizon, their wings glowing like quiet promises. He thought about his father again, the man who taught him that respect was the only fuel that never ran out. He whispered to the empty hall, "We're flying, Dad. Finally flying right." When he left O'Hare that night, snow had begun to fall, blanketing the ground in silence. The wind carried the faint hum of departing aircraft, a lullaby for a world still learning how to rise together. The sky, once a symbol of separation, had become a canvas of connection. And as long as people like David, Carla, and Emily carried that truth, humanity would keep climbing one flight, one heart, one act of grace at a time. Spring crept into New York quietly that year. The last frost melted from the sidewalks, and the air smelled faintly of rain and renewal. At Sky Nova headquarters, sunlight poured through the glass atrium, touching the plants Carla had insisted on adding a simple reminder that growth needed both light and time. Employees moved through the space with a new rhythm, one that pulsed with calm confidence rather than tension. The Langston program had evolved from an initiative into a movement. People didn't just follow rules anymore. They lived by respect. On a mild April morning, David Langston arrived earlier than usual. He carried no briefcase, only a notebook. His bomber jacket, slightly worn at the elbows, had become almost symbolic. The press still called it the jacket that changed the skies. He'd never cared for the title, but he understood its poetry. Symbols, when earned, could tell truths. Words couldn't. Marcus met him in the lobby, holding a tablet filled with graphs. "Morning," he said, smiling. "You should see these numbers. Customer Trust Index up 70%. Staff retention at a 5-year high. And our community fund oversubscribed by double." David listened, his eyes on the atrium fountain. "Good," he said quietly. "But the numbers aren't what matter most. What are people feeling?" Marcus grinned. "Hopeful, proud, a little emotional, if you want the truth." David nodded, satisfied. "That's worth more than any balance sheet." They walked toward the elevator. "Inside," Marcus said. "You've got a press interview at 10, a community roundtable at noon, and the pilot mentorship dinner tonight. You sure you want to do all 3? David smiled. "Marcus, I've been building things my whole life. This one's worth showing up for." Upstairs, Carla Monroe was finalizing the next stage of the Langston program, an online storytelling platform where crew and passengers could share personal moments of connection. She wanted the world to see what respect looked like when practiced daily. Emily Ruiz stood beside her, adjusting a presentation slide that read, "The Sky Listens Back." "I love that title," Emily said. "It feels alive." Carla smiled. "It's what we've learned, isn't it? For years, people thought passengers only spoke and we just served. Now, we listen. And when we listen, the sky listens too." As the two women reviewed the last few slides, their conversation turned personal. Emily asked softly, "Do you ever think about that day?" The flight Carla's gaze dropped to the floor. "Every day. Not out of shame anymore, out of gratitude. Because it taught me what kind of person I never want to be again." Emily placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Then it did its job. At 10 sharp, David sat across from a journalist from The Atlantic. The interviewer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Shaw, began with a familiar question. "Mr. Langston, when you look back at the day this all began, the incident, the humiliation, do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" David considered carefully before answering. Wishing it hadn't happened would mean erasing everything that came from it. The change, the growth, the humanity. Sometimes the worst moments in your life plant the seeds for the best in others. Rebecca nodded. "Do you think this company can keep that momentum? People love an inspiring story, but attention fades." David smiled slightly. "That's why we're not telling a story, we're living one." After the interview, he took the elevator down to the training center, where a group of new hires waited to meet him. They were fresh-faced, nervous, full of energy. He walked among them, shaking hands, asking where they were from. "Remember," he told them, "every passenger carries a story. You may never hear it, but your kindness can rewrite it." One trainee, a young man from Atlanta, raised his hand. "Sir, do you ever get tired of carrying all this expectation?" David laughed softly. "Every day. But fatigue reminds me I'm still human. Leadership isn't about being tireless. It's about being transparent enough to rest, then rise again. Later that afternoon, Marcus burst into his office with news. You're not going to believe this. We just got word Sky Nova has been nominated for the Global Aviation Ethics Award, first American airline to even be considered. David raised his eyebrows. Is that a real thing? It is now. Marcus grinned. Apparently, you started an industry trend. David leaned back, smiling faintly. We didn't start a trend. Marcus, we reminded people what decency looks like at 35,000 feet. As evening fell, the mentorship dinner brought together pilots, attendants, and maintenance staff. Round tables filled the Sky Nova hangar, now transformed with soft lighting and blue banners reading, We Rise Together. Carla opened the event, her voice strong but emotional. 6 months ago, I was certain I'd lost everything, she said. Now, I stand here surrounded by people who taught me that losing your way doesn't mean you stop flying. It just means you find a new course. The applause that followed was long and heartfelt. Emily took the stage next, sharing stories collected from across the company, small gestures that had restored trust between strangers. One message in particular drew murmurs from the crowd. It was from a passenger who had once refused to sit beside someone who didn't look first-class enough. After flying with Sky Nova's new team, the passenger had written, I realized class isn't what you buy. It's how you behave. When David finally took the microphone, the room fell silent. You've all heard my story, he began. But tonight, I want to hear yours. He invited employees to stand and share. One by one, they did. A mechanic spoke about learning to greet flight attendants by name. A pilot described apologizing publicly to a junior crew member after years of arrogance. A gate agent admitted she'd once ignored passengers who didn't speak English now. She'd started taking language classes. Tears glistened in more than a few eyes. David listened, hands clasped, pride swelling quietly in his chest. When the stories ended, he said, That's leadership. Not mine hours. The kind that doesn't sit in a boardroom but walks beside people, fixing things as we go. After the event, as the guests trickled out into the cool night, Carla approached him. You realize what you've done, right? She asked softly. David smiled. I didn't do it alone. She shook her head. Still, you gave us permission to care. That's rarer than power. He looked out toward the parked planes glimmering under the floodlights. Caring, he said, is the only thing that keeps us from crashing. When the hangar finally emptied, David lingered a while longer. He stepped up to one of the aircraft, placing his hand on its smooth fuselage. The cool metal vibrated faintly with energy, alive in its stillness. For years, he'd believed that success meant ascent, that to rise above was the goal. Now he knew the truth. The higher you fly, the more clearly you see the ground that holds you. He closed his eyes and whispered to the silent plane. Listen to them, old friend. The sky's full of new voices now. Outside, as he left the hangar, the city lights shimmered like constellations. The moon hung low, reflecting off the wings of departing jets. Somewhere out there, strangers were meeting kindness at 35,000 feet, never knowing they were part of a quiet revolution. For the first time since he'd taken that fateful flight, David felt something settle in him, not victory, not vindication, but peace. The kind that comes only when justice and grace finally share the same sky. He walked toward the waiting car, the night air cool against his face. Tomorrow, there would be more work, new challenges, new storms, but tonight, for once, he let himself rest. The sky, he thought, was no longer something to conquer. It was something to care for. And as long as people remembered that, humanity would keep flying true. Summer arrived like a promise. The heat shimmered above the runways at Liberty International, and the hum of engines blended with the rhythm of distant thunderclouds. The world had changed more than David Langston ever expected. What began as a single act of quiet resistance had grown into a movement that stretched across skies and continents. Airlines were studying SkyNova's methods. Universities were writing case studies about ethical leadership in motion. And passengers were sharing stories not of entitlement, but of grace. Inside SkyNova Tower, sunlight poured through the glass walls of the 62nd floor boardroom. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and paper ink. The long table was surrounded by familiar faces: Carla Monroe, Marcus Lee, Emily Ruiz, and several new department heads. It wasn't a meeting about crisis anymore. It was one about creation. David stood at the head of the table, jacket draped over his arm, sleeves rolled up. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried that same focus, the quiet strength that had defined him from the beginning. "Today," he began, "we're not here to talk about repair. We're here to talk about expansion. Real, sustainable, human expansion." He clicked a small remote, and the screen behind him came to life. A map of routes spread across the world, small blue arcs connecting cities like threads of light. "We're opening 3 new international hubs, Cape Town, Osaka, and Sao Paulo," he said. "But I don't want them to just be destinations. They should be ambassadors of our philosophy. Every gate, every counter, every uniform should say what we believe respect has no borders." The room murmured with excitement. Carla leaned forward. "We've been training managers in Johannesburg for the past 2 months. They're ready. David, they don't just want to adopt the Langston program, they want to evolve it for their culture." David smiled. "Good. That's how it should be. Respect isn't export, it's exchange." Emily chimed in, her tone bright. "We've been getting letters from passengers in Europe who want to volunteer for the Sky Stories project. They're writing about moments when kindness changed their flights. It's becoming viral." Marcus looked up from his notes. "Social metrics confirm it. Engagement is global. You've accidentally built a brand of humanity, not just an airline." David chuckled softly. "Then maybe we're finally in the right business." After the meeting, the team dispersed, leaving David alone with his thoughts. He stepped to the window, watching the skyline glisten under the afternoon sun. It struck him how far they had come from humiliation to hope, from silence to something close to symphony. He thought of his father again, of those nights in the small garage in Queens when they'd fix broken radios together. Charles Langston would say, "You can't just replace parts. Son, you have to understand the current that connects them." That was what this company had become, a network of people rediscovering the current of empathy. A knock came at the door. Carla entered quietly. "Got a minute?" David turned, smiling. "Always for you. Carla." She handed him a printed article. "You might want to see this." The headline read, "From Scandal to Standard, How One Airline Redefined Power." Below it, a photo of David in the hangar, surrounded by employees. The article spoke of SkyNova's journey, how humility and justice had reshaped an entire industry. But what caught his eye was the closing paragraph. "The true measure of leadership isn't control, it's courage. Courage to listen, to change, and to forgive." In the story of David Langston, the sky itself learned to bow to grace. He folded the paper carefully, "It's strange," he said softly, "to see your story told by someone else." Carla studied him. "Does it feel accurate?" He thought for a moment. "Mostly. But I wish they'd talk more about everyone else. About you, Emily, Marcus. This was never just mine." Carla smiled. "You gave it shape. The rest of us gave it air." They stood in companionable silence, the kind born of mutual respect. Later that evening, David and Marcus boarded a flight to Atlanta for an investor summit. David sat by the window, gazing at the fading horizon. The sky blushed in shades of orange and lavender, the sun sinking low behind a sea of clouds. Marcus broke the quiet. "You ever think about retiring? You've done more than most people could dream." David smiled faintly. "I think about it sometimes. But there's still more to build. Maybe not empires, but better skies." Marcus nodded. "You're addicted to purpose?" David chuckled. "Guilty as charged." When the plane reached cruising altitude, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard SkyNova Flight 1123. Our expected flight time is 1 hour and 40 minutes. And tonight, we're honored to have our CEO, Mr. David Langston, traveling with us." A wave of applause rippled through the cabin. Passengers craned their necks, smiling, some clapping enthusiastically. David looked around, embarrassed but deeply moved. A woman across the aisle leaned over. "Mr. Langston, I don't know if you remember me, but I was on Flight 209, the one—" Her voice trailed off, eyes shining. He recognized her face faintly. Older now, but familiar. "You were there." She nodded. "I was too afraid to speak up that day. I've regretted it ever since. But now, every time I fly SkyNova, I tell my kids your story. I tell them what grace looks like when it has power." David felt something warm rise in his chest. "You've already made peace with that moment just by sharing it," he said softly. The woman smiled. "Thank you for not giving up on the rest of us." As the plane glided through twilight, David closed his eyes, letting the hum of the engine soothe him. The world felt wide again, not as something to conquer, but as something to care for. When they landed in Atlanta, the terminal was quiet, nearly empty. As they walked toward the exit, Marcus glanced at him. "You know, I think your father would have been proud." David smiled. "I hope so. He used to tell me that the real test of flight isn't taking off, it's landing with your integrity intact." The following day, the summit hall was packed. Investors, journalists, and global partners filled the room. SkyNova's new campaign slogan shone on the backdrop beyond altitude. "Toward understanding." David took the stage to a standing ovation. He waited for the room to settle before speaking. His voice carried quiet conviction. "When I took over this airline, people said I was crazy for believing compassion could coexist with commerce. They said kindness doesn't pay bills. Maybe they were right. Kindness doesn't pay. But it saves. It saves reputations, relationships, and sometimes people's sense of worth. That's what we fly for." He paused, scanning the crowd. "The sky doesn't belong to those who own planes. It belongs to those who look up and still believe in possibility." The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. But David didn't feel like a celebrity. He felt like a messenger. After the event, he stepped outside, escaping the noise for a moment. The late afternoon air was warm, tinged with the scent of rain. A line of planes taxied in the distance, their wings glinting under the fading sun. Carla joined him quietly. "You ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. David smiled. "Every time I look at the horizon, it reminds me there's always more to reach for." Emily appeared beside them, carrying her phone. Someone just posted another video. A passenger on our London route said a flight attendant stayed with her when she was anxious during turbulence. She called it the Langston Calm. It's trending already. David laughed softly. Then I guess the sky really does listen back. They stood together in silence, watching as one plane after another took flight, their engines roaring softly against the wind. It wasn't just metal in motion, it was meaning, built by thousands of hands and hearts that had chosen decency over ego. The world didn't change in a day, but that night, above cities and oceans, Sky Nova carried something more powerful than passengers. It carried proof that dignity could soar. The story of David Langston reminds us that dignity is not something granted by status. It's something we choose, even when others try to take it away. His calm strength, his refusal to respond with anger, shows that true power isn't found in shouting. It's found in self-respect. When the world treats you as invisible, the most profound answer is to rise without losing your humanity. For older generations who have faced their share of disrespect or invisibility, this story echoes a quiet truth. Time doesn't dull our value. The measure of character isn't how loud we fight, but how gracefully we stand. Life will always offer moments of prejudice, injustice, or misunderstanding, but it's what we build afterward that defines us. Langston didn't destroy his enemies, he transformed their world. And that's the lesson. For all of us, choose justice over vengeance, growth over bitterness, compassion over pride. Because when we rise with grace, we lift the sky a little higher for everyone who follows. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story. If it touched your heart, if it reminded you of the strength that lives in quiet dignity, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel. Every story we tell is a bridge to understanding, to empathy, to change. Your support helps these messages travel further, reaching people who might need them most. So, thank you for listening, for caring, and for believing that kindness still has a place in this world. The next story begins with you.